Thank you very much for joining me here today. Excited for you to be here. I want to start right at the beginning, really. You went from being an athlete yourself to going into the corporate world and starting your business journey. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to go from being an athlete to getting into sales?
Yeah, I like when hockey was over for me, I really struggled with the transition in a big way. It's when you play sports at a high level, it becomes a huge part of your identity and it really is your purpose, right? And then one day you wake up and you can't really say, I'm an athlete anymore. So that transition was really hard for me. I also went to a liberal arts college. My major was sociology, my minor was art history and sign language, and I entered the job market in 2008. So I wasn't exactly fighting off the job offers. A lot of people told me like you should do sales, JR, you would love it. You're competitive, like all the typical things that we hear about sales. So like I went into it very hesitantly and felt like it was my only option. But then when I got into it, like right away, my third day in the office, I went into my boss's office and I told him, I'm like, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. Because immediately some things were very obvious to me. One is sales is a team sport. And anybody who played team sports growing up and then loses that, if you ask them what they miss the most, that's what they're going to tell you. They miss the locker room, they miss the camaraderie, they miss being accountable to other people. And you get that right away in sales. And I recognize that. The competition, which is like very much a thing that people say all the time, but there's very few there's very few professions where it's so black and white and there's a scoreboard that you can look at to know exactly where you stand. And most people are super uncomfortable with that. But for me, that's what drives me. The other piece is where it's a profession where it's a meritocracy. Like nobody cares, work harder. I realize that if I put in the effort and I develop the skills that were going to make me successful, I was going to make more money. Like full stop. It's almost exactly the same as being an athlete. So all those things combined, I found myself feeling really comfortable as a salesperson very quickly. And those are the things that I don't think people really think of. Most people hear the word sales, they think of high pressure tactics, lying, and pitching products. Those things aside, the other characteristics of sales were a really nice fit for me. And then because of the sales profession that I chose, which was high technology and infrastructure, I learned quickly that high pressure tactics and pitching products were not going to be how I was going to be successful. It was going to be understanding my clients' businesses and being a consultant, which is a lot different than what you think of if you don't know anything about sales. So it was a combination of all those things.
Yeah, it's funny because when I started, I was like the complete opposite. For me, it took 2 months to even pick up the phone without like me shitting myself, literally. I was so scared. But it was exactly the same moment what you said, like when I realized it's actually about being a consultant. It's not really about having to force something on someone. You're not calling them because you're doing it out of the blue. You're actually doing it with a reason. It became so much easier right away. But I feel like there's really a split in salespeople. Some people immediately get it. They like are perfect for the role, and some people really have to grow into it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to be good at it. Did you see that split as well? Like when you got your first colleagues and new hires?
Yeah, 100%. And here's the thing, right? There are two pieces of sales that scare the crap out of people. And I call them the indignities of sales. First, you have to get someone's attention, which is like the cold calling, the cold emailing, the outbound. And that's really hard and it sucks. There's anybody who like immediately enjoys that, I would say is probably a little bit of a weirdo, right? And then the other indignity is at the end of the process, which is after you do the consulting part, you have to ask them for their money. And a lot of people are uncomfortable doing that. However, between those two bookends, you do the same exact job that a McKinsey consultant does, that somebody that works at one of the big four firms does. You're understanding the current mode of operations, the goals they're having trouble achieving, and the problems they're having trouble solving. And you're partnering with them to figure out if your solution can close those gaps. That's the fun part of sales. The two bookends are that's what the money's for. You know
Mhm,
what I
yeah.
mean? So you're right. I would say we have a lot of people that I know would really enjoy the middle and they can't get over the ends. And that's fine. Like it's again, it's not for everybody, but if you can get over those ends, then you get to do the fun part in the middle.
Yeah. There's actually something like the part that I enjoy most about software sales is figuring out the software. Like it's really interesting and like talking with your clients about it and understanding, okay, where is the pain point here and how do we solve that with technology? But again, another thing that you see among salespeople is some people are really good at that part and other people just don't get it, but they can do a heck of a sell without knowing anything um, about the product or the service. What is your philosophy on that? Like, how much should a salesperson actually dive into the technology itself?
Eventually, over time, you should be somewhat of a subject matter expert for your solution. But I think what's more important initially is first and foremost, like really understanding the environment and what it looks like before your solution is in place. So, what's the day to day life look like of the persona you're going to be calling on? What is the problem? How does it show up? What's the impact that it has on the business? That is way more important than knowing exactly what your solution does. And then the second thing before you get to your solution is the business acumen, understanding because nobody like they don't teach that in college. At least they didn't when in sociology. Maybe they do in business school. But in most college like curriculums, you're not going to learn how businesses are structured, how they operate, how they make decisions, how they're organized. And that's if you can become an expert in the persona and the problem that you solve and get really good at business acumen. The third bucket of knowing your product inside and out is less important. But I do think eventually, like if you can cover all three and you're a good person that people like, then you're going to make a lot of
Yeah.
money.
Do you remember your first big deal?
I do. Absolutely. I remember it. It was a big storage refresh at a bank in New England. And it was like it was the best feeling in the world, ringing the bell. It was just like we won some championships in college. It was the same feeling. It was awesome.
How long did it take to get there? How many months? How many years?
Yeah, there was probably a 9 month sales cycle. I met the guy at a tech conference. I also remember like the first big deal that I lost, which was more a better. You learn more when you lose. And we had gotten a lot of progress with this account. We had a big meeting with their chief technology officer and their CIO, and they asked me like a very specific technical question. I had no fucking idea what this guy was talking about, Colin. Like literally, but I bullshit instead of doing the right thing and being like, "Hey, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll find it out. I promise." Which is what I should have done. I faked it, right? Fake it till you make it. And we moved on in the meeting. We continued. We left the meeting. I was with my sales engineer, and I'm like, "Oh, that meeting went awesome! Like, they're definitely they're gonna buy from us." And he started laughing. He's, "No, they're not, dude." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's, "You completely made up that answer that he asked you on. It was called Power Path Virtual Edition, which was like a storage technology that EMC sold, and I completely made up the answer." And he knew that they knew, and I didn't realize it because I was an idiot and we like never ever heard back from them again.
Oh,
And I never made that same mistake again though either. So it was a good lesson, expensive lesson, but a good one.
yeah, they are the best lessons, the expensive lessons. You'll never do that again. In the Turbonomic, you really led the company to like almost hyper growth. Like you went from 200 to 3,000 customers. What was, first of all, what was the transition into a more management position? Was it any different than just messing about with your sales reps before? Did you change your attitude at all?
I would say that's actually the reason I went to Turbo in the first place is because I wanted leadership experience and I knew that I was going to get it at a company like that was growing the way it was. And I'd love to say that I led the growth. I was part of the team that led the growth, right? Building a company that impressive takes a lot of people, but I was certainly a big part of it. On the management side, I was a very good sales rep. I never missed my quota. I was one of the top reps at my company prior, even though I was a decade younger than the closest rep in age. When I first started being a manager, that's how I approached it. Like I was a super rep. Like I was like, I had 6 people working for me and I would just take over meetings. I would take over deals. I was successful in terms of hitting numbers, but I wasn't a successful leader. What I learned very quickly was my job wasn't to do that. Like my job was to develop these people and turn them into reps that I didn't have to do that for. So teach them to fish, right? It sounds corny, but it's so true. And the other thing that I think being a good salesperson, you understand that nobody cares what you know until they know how much you care. And I think one of the things I learned early in my career was like, you can't manage everybody the same. I grew up, my dad was a hockey coach growing up. So I think it was second nature for me to understand that in order for me to lead people, I really had to understand what was important to them. And then I needed to use that, not against them, but use that to help get the most out of them. And those are things I didn't do in my first 2 quarters that it took me a little while to get to. So I wouldn't say it was an easy transition, but once you start to understand those two things, that like your job is to develop your replacement essentially, and your job is to understand and really motivate them to take the action that you want based off of what they care about, not what you care about. That changed the game for me as a leader.
Okay, so first of all, good sales reps are always the ones that work the hardest, and they have people skills. Like that combination can be lethal. But besides hard work, what other characteristics did you see amongst the really talented younger sales reps?
Curiosity is a superpower as a salesperson. Like true, authentic curiosity. And I think you can bundle it in with like empathy, like really trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Because if you're truly curious, then that means you're going to ask great questions and you're going to really seek to understand. And it changes the way you converse with people because you're really trying to like get to the core of things. And then empathy is critical because, especially if you're like, one of the things I've always been, fortunately, is like very passionate and convicted about what I'm selling, as this is the right solution, which can be dangerous if you don't match that with empathy. Because if I'm talking to someone and I'm like, this guy doesn't get it, like I know I'm right and he doesn't get it, then I'm not going to be a very good salesperson. But if I really can put myself in their shoes and try to understand why he's not getting it or she's not getting it, and then think about what's important to them, then I know that I can get them to the point where they're on the same side of the table as me.
I want to go to when you joined Pillar, because that was like the first time that you went from like executive position to executive position and you went to a different company. How did you approach that? Was it because it's a completely different technology? You're starting from the ground up, but you're starting with a lot more responsibility. How did you go into that?
Not well, I'll be honest with you. Like I learned a lot of really hard lessons at Pillar, just like mostly from a go to market and like company building perspective. My title was CRO, but it was a very small, early stage, founder led company. They had just raised some capital. They brought me in to like really build out the go to market function. And at the time, I was coming from Turbo, which by then we're like a $200 million company from like a revenue perspective. We had a lot of like really great partnerships that I had a big hand in building out. We had this scale and predictability that meant certain things about the way you would approach like growth. The way I would describe what happened at Pillar for me was they had a little bit of kindling, like in terms of fire, right? They had a dozen and a half customers, but the founder had closed most of the deals. And instead of coming in and just being like, all right, let's just get busy and get like meetings and try to figure out exactly how we're going to sell this thing, I brought my big growth brain, and instead of putting like little pieces of like newspaper into the fire to let it grow and grow and grow like organically, I started dumping logs on it, right? Hey, let's go partner with AWS, like literally the biggest tech company in the world. Let's sell this as a whole platform versus going and solve these small problems that you guys have done for these other dozen customers. And it didn't work. I failed a lot of times there. And I think it was like anytime you lose, like really good lesson for me for when I started Shift Group about how to build, especially in those early days, in those early stages. Um, and I took the job, honestly, Colin, because I wanted to drive the bus. Like I, instead of blaming other people if things didn't work out, like at Pillar, I had to own it. Like it was on me, that those decisions were on me. So I couldn't blame anybody but myself. And it was a great lesson, right?
Hmm. It's funny because when you see partnered with AWS on your CV, people are going to be like, wow, he must know some stuff. That's good. Why didn't you start a company before
Exactly.
that?
One, I don't think I was ready. I think I needed Pillar and I needed that experience to really understand what it was going to take, especially in the early days, because there's early days when you start a company, you start at zero. And I think I needed that experience for my own personal story in terms of creating credibility. Shift Group was an idea that I had like many years ago, like in the mid 2010s. So I always knew that I was going to go here. The other thing was like I felt like I needed, like the reason I went down the sales leadership route at all is because I knew I wanted to be a CEO someday. And like most things, I thought that meant being a CEO at a company, like somebody hiring me that had a company and they would make me the CEO. And then I started, when you get to that level and you're in the boardrooms and you're around people that are already CEOs and CFOs and investors and board members, they've been operators. You have this epiphany where you're like, these motherfuckers are just trying to figure it out like the rest of us. Like they don't work harder than me. They're not that much smarter than me. Obviously, they have more scars and experience. Now I have some scars and experience. I shouldn't be sitting in this seat. I should be sitting in that seat, and I'm fucking ready. So I finally said, let's do it. Stop pointing the finger at other people. Take some ownership. You got a good idea. People are going to pay for it. Let's bring this idea to market. I just said, let's go.
Did COVID have anything to do with the final like push, or was it really just that was a moment, regardless of what?
COVID really didn't have much to do with it at all. I think a little bit because what happened, Colin, is I've helped hockey players make the transition into sales like my whole career because like hockey's a small world. Me and my brothers all played at the college level. One of my brothers played professionally and at the Olympic level. My dad is a Hall of Fame coach. Hockey at that level is a small world. And when guys retired from hockey, inevitably they would land in front of me because somebody would be like, there's this kid JR, he's a hockey player. He's not that smart and he's made a ton of money in tech. You should go talk to him. Right. And I would talk to these kids and I would help them like, hey, yeah, it's an awesome career. This is why you should do it. This is what you need to be prepared for. And then I would introduce them into my network. And I think a little like that, those number of meetings I was having on nights and weekends, it definitely grew because of COVID. Because a lot of kids that were playing like semi-professional, not semi-professional, but like lower level professional hockey, like the East Coast League, the Southern Professional League, or over in Europe, a lot of those guys said, hey, I'm done. I'm not waiting for this thing to work itself out. I need to go find a real job because you don't get paid if the season isn't happening. So I think it was a little bit of like, all of a sudden I had so many kids that were calling me that I'm like, I said, all right, it's time to start making some money here. And I'm not going to charge the kid who just made 28 grand playing in Tennessee to help him. I'm going to charge my buddy who's a VP of sales at a $50 million software company to pay me when I introduce him to the kid. And that's how I figured out the business model.
Are you a numbers guy? When you look at the reports of the quarter, do you look at how many calls have been made, how many have been converted, how many emails have been sent? What is the conversion on that? Or are you more depends on the people as well? People at the call.
It's a combination. You have to be able to do both. To date, I haven't been a numbers guy at my own company. I'm process driven, but like, if you can give me those numbers, like I can look at those numbers and go, okay, we need to fix this. We need to do this better. She needs to move over here. So I have a unique combination of being able to do that, but also focusing on the person and motivating the person to drive change and improve. I think you have to do both nowadays, especially building a software company, which we are. The data is a story that you need to be able to read and understand what that story is telling you.
Before we go into the actual software, a kid comes to you, he's 22 years old, he's just gotten out of professional hockey because he tore his ACL 15 times, which happens way too often. What happens? How does he get trained? How do you get him to be a sales rep?
Yeah, we have an online platform with a curriculum that the first thing that we do is we do self-discovery. Like first these folks need to understand their personal values, their identity, and what's driving them now that they're not in uniform anymore. Because when you're in uniform, that's what drives you. When you lose that, you have to find a new why. So that's the first thing we focus on. The second thing we focus on is deprogramming and destigmatizing what they think a sales career means. So, like we talked about it at the beginning, we explain that consulting continuum and the two bookends, and like how really what you do in the middle is where you make the most money. So, convincing them that it's really a consulting job, that you're in control of your compensation. Then we do a really good job of showing them the parallels in the characteristics they developed as an athlete or a veteran and the parallels between the environment of serving in the military or playing sports at a high level and the environment of an elite sales organization, because they are exactly the same. After that, it's career discovery, then it's career upskilling, and then it's access to our customers.
Mhm. That's a lot of mindset, which is quite interesting because obviously that's a big part of sales, but you'd also think that a lot of it is learning by doing. Is there a lot of role play involved as well, like more interactive stuff?
Yeah, the job skill foundations, like depending on the industry, so using tech as an example, because that's obviously our biggest focus, they learn how to build a list, research the list, write an email, make a cold call, make a discovery call, build a 30, 60, 90. They learn about the sales tech stack. And like each thing we teach them, we give them a case study and they have to do repetitions on that case study. So it's here's the concept. Here's the assignment. Do it again. Okay, you're ready. Now let's move to the next skill. We've taken the same approach that it takes to become great at anything and applied it to sales.
Hmm.
And it is heavy mindset, Colin, but dude, that's 90% of this job. If you have the right mindset, you're going to be successful.
100% hard work. That's what we said at the beginning, right? That's
Yep.
90% of it. So, what about on the other side? Because you already started by having a network. You already also had a business network because you were in sales. But the pitch is actually already really good. I have people who are highly motivated to get into the industry. They've been trained by me with this track record. Was it easy to get the B2B side ready?
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, it's, I don't want to say it was easy, but also remember the timing. This was early 2022. Like the first 6 months of 2022, we did $700,000 in revenue. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be we're going to be a $10 million business in 18 months. And then summer 2022 hit it was like running into a brick wall, right? Like 60% of our customers forget about not hiring from us. They fired their entire talent organization, the people we were working with. So it went from like fairly easy to like really hard, and it happened almost overnight. Like I remember laying on the floor in my office in Arizona, like ready to cry, being like, I got to go find a CRO job. This is over. But that going through that type of shit is like what makes great companies great. So we fought through it. We grew through it. We figured it out. Like we started getting creative about how we got our offering in front of the right people. And that's, to your point, like our offering is unique. It's niche. And if somebody gets the value of it, they get it quickly. There's not a lot of selling involved. So we were able to fight through the hard part. And now it's starting to come back. Like we're seeing the market come back, and we're seeing a huge opportunity to get out of tech and into other industries. And we're just like, we just got to go take advantage of it at this point.
Do you sell to HR and talent acquisition? Are those the job titles that you focus on?
No, we're entry level sales. Talent, we partner with like talent acquisition as our customer, talent acquisition and sales leadership. That's who we sell to.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And so you are the job titles that you're targeting to introduce, like to get new companies to place the people for, you target the HR manager most likely or director of HR.
We try to be brought into HR through sales leadership,
Mhm.
because HR, like anything, HR sees us a little bit as competitive, right? They're paid to source and hire talent, That's what we do. So we really need a champion from the sales organization to say, this is who I want to hire from. But the technology that we're building is we're trying, like, with that in mind, we're focusing on the roadmap to make it more of a talent acquisition tool than a replacement. And I think that when we get there, it's going to make our sales process a lot more smooth.
Mm. Yeah, so you now got the software in place. Was that already always the plan from the start, or was that something you realized you needed as you went along?
It was literally, so I built the deck. It wasn't called Shift Group, but I built the deck in like 2015. I was on a flight to London for meetings over in Canary Wharf with all the banks. And I was in the airport at Logan, and my brother just introduced me to his buddy who just retired from hockey. And I was talking to him, and I was making an intro for him to one of my buddies who's a sales leader. And then I like literally I had to hang the phone up to get on the flight. And I was supposed to build a deck for the meetings over in London. Instead, I spent the whole flight and I built literally what Shift Group is today. And I actually I kick off every quarter. I show my team that deck and I remind them like, hey, this is what we're building. This was the vision. And I show them how all of the stuff that I laid out in that 5-hour flight has come to life, including the platform. So this was always part of the plan.
All right, so 3 years from now, where is Shift Group going to be, and how are you going to get there?
We're going to be the de facto platform that active athletes, retired athletes, active military personnel, and veterans think of when they think about making the transition into the business world. And we're going to be the de facto platform that every company in every industry thinks of when they go to hire an entry-level role, not just sales, but any role. That's where we're going. 3 years might be a little aggressive, but that's like the ultimate vision. 3 years from now, we're probably the de facto platform for everything I just talked about, but for sales still. But we're going to slowly move over into really any entry-level role.
Finally, then, what do you think is going to happen to sales? How is sales going to change? It's changed in the last couple of years because now we've gone a lot more online meetings, and it's not the same as in real life. You traveled a lot. That doesn't happen as much anymore. Do you see any change in the channels that we're using, or is it still probably going to be relatively similar to what it is today?
I think the ability to leverage technology like a fifth limb is going to become more and more important, right? Like people say AI is not going to replace sales. The salesperson that can use AI is going to replace the salesperson that can't. So I think technology is going to continue to be a huge part of it. And I think like we talked about this idea of like tactical empathy. I think it's going to be, as things get more noisy and inboxes fill up and phones continue to ring, I think your ability to truly understand the person that you're engaging with is going to become more and more important over time. Because like the reason sales is the way it is now compared to 30 years ago, right? 1994, when my dad he sold used auto parts, and people would call his shop and say, "Hey, John, I need a transmission for a 92 Honda Civic." And my dad would be like, "All right, it's going to be $450. I got another guy that wants it. Can you come pick it up like by tomorrow?" And you saw a few things there. You saw the high pressure tactics, you saw the lying, and you saw him pitching. And he would hang up the phone. I was like 9 years or 11 years old at the time. He would hang up the phone and then he would call other junkyards and I would hear him. And he'd be like, "Hey, Joe, you got a transmission for a 92 Civic? Like, I can get it off your hands. I'll give you 25, $50 for it." And I'd get the transmission. He'd hang up. And I would be like, "Dad, I thought you said it was 450. I thought you said you had it." He'd be like, "Shut the hell up, JR." The reason for that was there was like this information asymmetry. My dad had access to this information and the prospect didn't have access to it. So that's how the sales profession was built. Now, what you've seen is like the information symmetry is there now. And I think it's almost the buyer has outweighed their access to information to the seller. So the ability to have empathy and really understand what this person's trying to accomplish when they have more information than you do is going to be the skill set that's going to differentiate you moving forward as a salesperson.
Yeah. I agree 100%. That's an amazing story. And an amazing story to end on. Thank you so much for coming on, Jay. I really appreciate it, and this has been super interesting. So thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.